My name is Showell. I'm a mastering engineer and I'm here at Abbey Road. Started mastering a long time ago now, 1984. I left school at 18 and worked at a company in Primrose Hill called Utopia. Moved on to various places at Masterpiece Mastering, Metropolis Mastering, and now I'm here.
My name's Geoff Pesche. I'm a mastering engineer here at Abbey Road. I've been here since 2006, but I've been doing this since school.
Sometimes I'm doing classic album recuts, sometimes it's new mastering, sometimes it's remastering. If it's a new master, then I'll have the tape or the file and make it sound nice in here. And I'll try and do two different recordings onto the workstation, one of which will have digital peak limiting for a digital source to make it loud, and another one with no limiting whatsoever for the cut, and that's the one I'll use for the vinyl master.
These days you're generally working from, when you first start cutting a record from scratch, you're generally working from a digital file, because, you know, tapes are around but not as popular as they were. So what I would do personally, I create the digital files first, so you've got your files for digital download ready to go, and generally, because I tend not to crush the music, I can cut the record parts from that, but I will generally do the record last because there's more to go wrong.
If I cut it too loud, there can be distortion. If I'm not watching the S sound, the vocal S sound, you can get sibilance, and that will crack up on the record, or it will break up on certain cartridges. If I do get the grooves too close to each other, they can actually overcut and you'll have a record that jumps. If I don't cut it loud enough, there's noise. You're kind of like spinning plates almost, like a magician would on a stage show. And you've got to make them all wobble a bit, but not too much. And the trick is to try and keep everything just moving nicely without it being nothing being too seriously off at any point. And that's what makes it fun, really, because you're constantly watching 5, 6, 7 things all at the same time, any one of which, if it goes wrong, would spoil it.
It has to be right. To create a CD master again is 10 minutes, but to create the record again, it's an hour and 10 minutes. So you have to be really, really sure that everybody's happy, everything's approved, and yep, press the button today. So the real difference of it, you've got to take more care cutting a record, definitely.
The trick is to try and make it just all work and sound good, so that it doesn't sound as if it's been processed for the cut. It needs to sound like the recording does, but sometimes you have to just gently cajole it and squeeze bits here and there just to make it play back nicely at home. In terms of mixing records so that you can cut them for vinyl, I think there's certain things you really want to avoid. You want to avoid stereo bass. There's a reason why all these old classic records have the bass in the middle. It's because the cutting stylus will try to cut in 4 directions at the same time if you've got stereo bass, because you've got this groove and that groove, and then you've got the lateral thing as well for the frequencies. So and all of that in stereo goes round and round and round. And if you're trying to cut big bass excursions and it's loud and it's stereo, it just gives up and it lifts out of the disc and then it crashes back into the disc, and it's unplayable, basically. So avoid stereo bass. I would avoid very bright sibilant vocals, and don't go mad with the compression. You can take that off for a version that you give to the guy who cuts the record.
I would suggest to do everything cleanly, not too loud. Try and get your phase straight if you can. And first timers, watch it, ultrasonic and low subsonic. Cutting heads do not like that extreme of frequencies. It has to be linear.
No one's made a new lathe for, crikey, 35 years probably now, since the mid-80s. The lathe I have here, this is my lathe behind me, that's a Neumann VMS 80. That was the latest one they made. They stopped after that. That was as far as it got. And that's quite sophisticated, for its time, very sophisticated. And even now, it still does some clever stuff. Lots of computer boards in it. I mean, it was revolutionary when it came out in the way that the groove spacing computer can work out the shape and size of the grooves and shoehorn everything in close together. That was really, although that had been done previously it was a bit more steam powered. This was very high tech for its time, and if you've got one that works properly, then it's still pretty clever.
We had a DMM lathe in this from Direct Metal Mastering, which cuts direct to a copper blank as opposed to a black lacquer. And here at Abbey Road, room 5, we had one of those in here when I first joined, which didn't work too well actually. But we managed to do a swap with our lathe here with that one from a company called Record Industries in Haarlem in Holland, and they took our DMM lathe away in a van, but at the same time brought this black lacquer lathe here for us. We did a straight swap.
All lathes, including the steam power ones I referred to earlier, have a groove spacing computer, and this is where the lathe has a little memory in it, and you play the audio to it twice. Around about half revolution before the music actually comes up to the cutter head, it goes into a computer, and it thinks, well, I've just cut this shape groove, but there's a load of bass coming up which needs more space, and the groove's going to sort of swing left to right laterally and need much more room on the disc. If you've got a long side and you're trying to get the grooves really close to each other, if you get a sudden bit of bass, it can crash into the previous groove and jump. So you need to allow for it. Now, if you allowed for a massive bass excursion all the time, you'd be wasting disc space and you run out of room. So you have to try and be efficient with it. So in the old days of analogue tape, you'd have a little loop of tape and you'd have 2 heads. And this is a system that we still use here at Abbey Road. And the first head goes off to the computer so it can work out what's coming up. And the second head is what's actually cut into the disc. But Neumann, by the late 70s, early 80s, when this model first appeared, they'd really kind of honed that art down with the computerized spacing computer.
This is the zenith of disc cutting machines, and it's quite simple to use. It's not very mechanical. There's lots of automation with it, and there's lots of fail-safe stuff with it. You can't run the cutter head into the side of the turntable and break it, which you could do with the older lathes. You could also rip the lead screw out of the carriage if you weren't careful. All this stuff that will cost out thousands and thousands of pounds to fix, with these, they're all trip switches. It won't let you move it into a position where you shouldn't move it. So for that reason, they're amazing, because when we've trained 3 guys here as mastering engineers, and the hardest thing to show them was the cutting lathe, because they're all too terrified of breaking it. How I would approach cutting a vinyl record from the off. First of all, type of music. Is it a piano and voice album, or is it a thrash metal band? Length of side. Square pegs and round holes. You can only get 20 minutes of audio onto one side of a record at any given volume. You start to go over that. There's a sliding scale in time where you lose volume over time. So once I've sussed that out, I've got 20 minutes of music. It's pop. It's got so much low end in it, so much high end in it. I can fit it on a record at X level with Y land and Z depth. Then there's a table in my head that sets the cutting lathe up, and I think that I can make it fit. And generally, probably 95 times out of 100, I probably do make it fit because of experience. But you've got to look at time and genre first of all. Disc cutting systems roll off top. That's what they do. It's the nature of the beast. That's why records sound warmer. They don't add low end. They roll top off. So that's the part of it, part of the charm.
The disc really itself has not really changed in the last 70 odd years. It's an aluminium base and it's coated in nitrocellulose. So I don't cut into vinyl. That's not what that does. It's much softer than that. The stuff on the aluminium, it's a bit like semi-dry paint. So it's much softer than a finished record. And the recording stylus in the cutter head behind me, that's heated. So it just drops straight into the disc, melts as it goes. And then it's very low tech really. We're blasting it with 600 watts per channel into a coil, not unlike a headphone coil, that vibrates the stylus, and that records the music into the disc. So the disc I use, I'll cut the lacquer. You do one lacquer per side. So if you've got, a record A and B, you've got 2 discs in the box that goes off to the factory. They'll then spray that with silver nitrate. So you've got a layer of silver on there, 1 atom, maybe 2 atoms thick. Then it gets nickel plated, so it goes into an electroplating bath, where they'll spin it around with nickel in the bottom, and it grows nickel on the back of the silver. They'll peel that off, and then that's called the father. So that's a disc with ridges, not grooves. That goes back into the bath straight away, and they'll grow a mother, which gets peeled off, and they can play that, check it sounds okay, and there's no crackles or noise. If that sounds good, it then goes back in the bath again, where they grow the stamper, and it's the stampers that go into the record presses that press the finished records.
This is the lacquer disc, black lacquer, an aluminium disc or stainless steel with an 1/8 hour lacquer coating on it, or 200 microns if you're metric. So a groove's going to be about a hair on your head. Very, very fine tolerances. A bit like a wood lathe, really. The same principle. A lead screw turning a cutting edge, just taking the residue out, the chip, the wood shavings, if you like, lacquer shavings, into the glass jar at the back here. You'll hear the suction start in a minute, which is going to hold the disc flat on the turntable and take away any swarf that comes out into the tube at the back or into the glass jar, which is kept wet for static, which can be a bit of a pain for records. Hissing sound you can hear, Hoover pump holding the disc flat on the turntable, and again just going to take away any residue or swarf that comes out of the lacquer. I'm just going to have a look at alignment here, really. Make sure that the cutting stylus is perpendicular to the disc, which it is. So that's now cutting just free air, silent grooves, waiting for me to tell it to do something.
So here is the lathe. This is the lacquer on the lathe. As mentioned earlier, it's a aluminium disc coated in nitrocellulose. And I'm going to do it's actually 14 inches in diameter, so it's bigger than an LP. The reason for that is so I can do a test cut on the outside edge, which is the first thing I'm going to do now. So I'm ready to go, and we drop it. Very high-tech part coming up where I blow on it. Yeah. And there we go. So that looks good. I'll also do a noise test. So we have a pickup cartridge here, an arm, and so first things first, let's look at that here. There's the grooves I'm cutting, and so we can, I can prove to you that I'm not faking this. If I tap the lathe here, there you go. So you mustn't play the monitoring too loud when you're cutting, because it can affect the head, and obviously you don't shout at the cutter head. There's no real noise in the cut from here. It's very, very clean and quiet. Noise comes in later on, either at home if you've got lots of dirt and dust in the record. Dust is the enemy of the system pretty much. If you can keep your records clean, you'll have a much nicer sound. And sometimes at the pressing plants things can go wrong and you'll get a bit of noise, but generally they're pretty good these days. You get some really good records coming out of them. So I'm ready to go. So all the controlling is coming from here. I push this button here, it says fast, and this will run to the area where it will have to do the run-in groove. So this will move really, there's a motor here which drives the lead screw. It's very, very fast. That's whizzing along here. I'm about to drop in. There we go. Run-in groove is rolling. I'm going to hit go. You can probably just hear Roger Daltrey in the background singing away there. Yeah, the same way that if you play a record at home, if you have the amplifier turned off, but you
Yeah.
Put your ear to the pickup, you can hear it. Well, that's recording it in the disc there. It's obviously going to be fairly blurry because it's going around at 33 1/3 RPM, but that's a 50 times microscope. So what you're seeing here, this is the groove here going across, and then this white space, that's land. That's the gap between the groove. If you've got some extreme stereo, it could go very, very thin. So it tries to allow for it, but you can defeat the system. So you just need to have a look at it. I mean, I'll look more closely after I'm done, just to double check everything's looking fine. Check nothing's got too close, you know. They can basically just about kiss, but if there's any overlap, at the very slight edge, if it's just overlapping gently, it will play fine, but you'll get a click. So I don't like that. And some factories, some of the highest quality plants will just reject it if they're kissing. So I'd like to have I like as close as possible, but not actually, you know, overlapping. If they overlap in an extreme sense, then you'll get a jump. It will skip. There you go. So we're at the end of track 1, and I now have to push this button here, which is the marker, and that's just done the little band between song 1 and song 2 on the disc. That's the land and depth. So that's the depth at which it's quite wide stereo here, so it's really using up a lot of depth. You wouldn't normally see it go that deep on an LP cut, but this album's it's wide, and I don't want to limit that. The sides aren't so long that I have to kind of limit that down. If this was a 25-minute album side, I'd have to shoehorn some of that off, because it's just you run out of room, you know. Volume and stereo width and bass all take up lots of room on your disc, so you have to try to, you know, cajole it down. I'm lucky with this album side, it's only 18 minutes, so I've got room to spare, not lots of, but enough to be able to get it on without doing any kind of stereo width reduction. This whole shaft is attached to a motor, and that is working from the lathe computer, which is listening to the advanced signal. So that, if it needs to, will speed up and drive this whole carriage across the disc a bit faster. So when I'm doing the lead in groove or the lead out groove, that will jump up in a second, and then music will come in, it'll go again. He says, here we go. Yeah. So this pitch meter is not the pitch of the music in terms of the frequencies of what they're playing. This is the speed at which the stylus is moving across the disc. And that's a combination of what the land is doing, which is the space between each groove, and what the depth is doing. And these are the 600 watts per channel amplifiers that feed the cutter head. So that's the temperature of the cutter head, and this is the current it's drawing to cut the music.
So then I would just give it a quick visual, make sure the grooves are not running into each other, the stylus hasn't got any imperfections. I always say the walls of the grooves can kiss, but they can't make love. If they're banging into each other, then meeting middle to middle, then we've got a problem. We need to address what's on the disc or on the source.
So what we've got here, these sort of slow movements left to right, this is sort of bass area. Oh, that very fast movement there, that would be something high frequency, probably a tambourine or something. So literally what we're looking at is the music here, and it's the shape and size of the groove will vary on every record. So no two records that are the same length will look the same, because it's all to do with whatever the waveform is. This is a total mechanical analog carrier of whatever the music's doing at that point. And that's why it's called mechanical copyright. It dates back from this, because this is a mechanical recording of the piece of music. And then when we're done, end of the side, you push this button here that says fast, and that writes the run out groove into the disc. And that's whizzing along here. It's got to the lock, so it does 1 1/4 revolutions, lifts up and returns. and that's going at about 400 RPM to push that back. So it's pretty amazing how it's the engineering of this to go from hardly moving at all, really, really slowly to, you know, to absolute full tilt. When we're done and we're happy with the way the groove looks, you can autograph it as well. So I could write here, let's go, if you can get a shot of this, miles, Abbey Road. There we are. And sometimes you'll get an artist who want you to write a little comment, kind of cryptic comment in the groove. Usually the more cryptic it is, the better. I did have a guy in the 80s. I did an acid house record, and it was really, you know, it was quite a cool track in its, you know, of its genre. And I thought it was good. And he wanted me to write "For My Mum Beryl" in the run-out groove, which kind of killed his street cred. But you know, whatever. It's his record. He can do what he wants, can't he? But, yeah. So you can literally write anything. It's not a good idea to write anything too, because you could be libelous. This is effectively printing, so you've got to be careful what you write. I could tell you a few funny stories, but not on camera.
The special bits about vinyl are the fact that it's tangible. You know, you create something that's a tangible item, not something that's in a computer that you can't see. So that the fact that it's an event to play a record is, I think that's special for, and will always be more so than playing a computer file, definitely. If you were trying to invent a way of getting music into the home, you wouldn't do that now. You know, it's ridiculous. The system in itself shouldn't work. You know, it's so low tech, but actually something magic happens when everything works right. You've got a lot of ifs in there. You know, you've got a good recording and a nice cut and nice work at the factory to get the metal parts made. If that all happens nicely, and then you've got a good record deck at home and a nice system, you put it on, it just sounds incredible. And it's something about playing records it's more fun. I find at home, if I play a record, when it finishes, I'll play another one and then another one. Whereas if I'm listening to digital media, for some reason you just kind of get distracted and you turn it off after one album or whatever, or a few tracks. It's not as involving. And I don't quite know why that is. It doesn't really make sense. But I think it's just the fact that you've made all this effort, you kind of want to commit to it more. So you'll spend that 40 minutes, you know, listening to this record.
That's all for now. If you like what you saw, please be sure to like and share it, and subscribe and click the bell icon so you know when we upload new content to our YouTube. Also find us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Thanks for watching.